It was a quiet afternoon in Sarasota, Florida, the kind of day where the sun warms the pavement and the palm trees sway in a gentle, salty breeze. November 7, 1997, inside a neat suburban home, a scene of unimaginable horror was waiting to be discovered. The house belonged to Sheila Bellush, her husband Jamie, and their large, blended family. It was supposed to be their safe haven, a new beginning far from a troubled past. But on this day, that sanctuary was violated in the most brutal way imaginable. And the first to find the aftermath were the children. Her eldest daughter, Stevie, just 13 years old, walked in from school. She called out for her mom. Silence. A strange, heavy silence. Then she saw them. Her little sisters, the quadruplets, barely 2 years old, were there. But something was terribly wrong. They were covered in something dark, something red. Stevie's mind struggled to comprehend the scene. The toddlers were wandering, confused, their tiny footprints tracking the crimson stains across the floor. They had been alone with their mother's body for hours, their small world shattered by an act of unspeakable violence they were too young to understand. It was a picture of innocence lost, a domestic dream turned into a waking nightmare. Stevie's frantic call to 911 brought the authorities rushing to the scene. What they found was a tableau of domestic life, violently interrupted. The kitchen, the heart of the home, was now a crime scene. Sheila Bellush lay on the floor, her life taken from her. The quadruplets, whose very existence had brought so much joy, were now silent witnesses to their mother's final, terrifying moments. They were physically unharmed, but the emotional scars were already being etched into their young lives. The quiet Florida neighborhood, a place of family barbecues and children's laughter, was now swathed in yellow police tape, its peace irrevocably broken. The question hung heavy in the humid Florida air. Who would do this? Who would commit such a monstrous act in broad daylight, leaving 4 toddlers to fend for themselves beside their slain mother? It didn't seem like a robbery gone wrong. Nothing of significant value was taken. The brutality of the attack suggested something personal, something deeply hateful. As investigators began to piece together the puzzle, they looked not at strangers, but at Sheila's past. A past she had tried so desperately to escape. A past that had followed her all the way to this sunny, unsuspecting corner of the world. Sheila Bellush was a woman defined by her love for her children. They were her world, her purpose. Before the quadruplets, before the move to Florida, her life had been a winding road of hopes, struggles, and the constant search for stability. Her first marriage, to a man named Michael Bellush, gave her 2 daughters, Stevie and Daryl. It was a relationship that, like many, eventually came to an end. But Sheila's devotion to her girls never wavered. She was a mother first and foremost, a role she embraced with every fiber of her being. She dreamed of a big, happy family, a home filled with warmth and security. Her path then crossed with Allen Blackthorne. He was a millionaire, charismatic and successful. On the surface, he seemed to offer the stability she craved. They married, and for a time, it might have looked like Sheila had found her happy ending. But behind the facade of wealth and success, a darker reality was taking shape. The marriage was tumultuous, marked by conflict and control. It was a relationship that would ultimately unravel, leaving behind a legacy of bitterness and a custody battle that would cast a long, dark shadow over Sheila's life. She was a woman who wanted peace, but found herself entangled in a web of discord. After her divorce from Blackthorne, Sheila found love again. This time, with a man named Jamie Bellush. It was a different kind of love, a partnership built on mutual respect and a shared vision for the future. They married and decided to blend their families, creating a bustling household filled with life. And then came the miracle. Sheila, who had always wanted a large family, became pregnant with quadruplets. The birth of Casey, a boy, and his 3 sisters, Courtney, Christy, and Carly, was a moment of pure joy. Their family was complete. It was everything Sheila had ever wanted. A loving husband, 6 beautiful children, and the promise of a bright future. With a new husband and a new expanded family, Sheila's dream was finally taking shape. She was a dedicated mom, juggling the demands of 2 teenagers and 4 babies with a smile. Her life revolved around feedings, school runs, and the happy chaos of a full house. She and Jamie created a home that was a sanctuary, a place where their children could feel safe and loved. It was a life she had fought for, a peace she had earned. But even as she embraced her new happiness, the echoes of her past were never far behind. A past that refused to let her go. The happiness Sheila found with Jamie and their children was constantly threatened by the lingering presence of her ex-husband, Allen Blackthorne. The end of their marriage was not the end of the conflict. Instead, it was the beginning of a long and agonizing custody battle over their two daughters, Stevie and Daryl. Blackthorne, a man accustomed to getting his own way, fought relentlessly for control. The dispute was not just about parenting, it was about power. He accused Sheila of being an unfit mother, launching a bitter and protracted legal war that drained her emotionally and financially. He seemed determined to make her life as difficult as possible. The battle was characterized by harassment and intimidation. Blackthorne allegedly used his vast resources to track Sheila's movements, to monitor her life, and to create a constant state of anxiety. For Sheila, it felt like she was always looking over her shoulder. The legal system, meant to provide resolution, became a battleground where she had to constantly defend her character and her right to parent her children. The stress was immense. She feared for her safety, and more importantly, for the well-being of her daughters, who were caught in the crossfire of this toxic dispute. She was living in a state of siege. The breaking point came. Sheila and Jamie decided they could no longer live under this constant cloud of fear and harassment. They needed a fresh start, a place where Blackthorne's influence couldn't reach them. Florida seemed like the perfect escape. It was far from San Antonio, Texas, where Blackthorne lived. It promised sunshine, anonymity, and the chance to raise their family in peace. The move was a bold act of self-preservation, a desperate attempt to protect her children from the escalating conflict and to finally build the tranquil life she had always dreamed of. They packed up their lives, hoping to leave the past behind them. But distance, they would tragically learn, was no guarantee of safety. Moving to Sarasota was supposed to be the final chapter in a difficult story. The beginning of a new, happy book. Sheila took steps to hide their new location, keeping their address private and unlisted. She believed that by putting 1,000 miles between her family and Allen Blackthorne, she had finally found security. She settled into her new home, focused on her quadruplets and teenagers, and allowed herself to breathe a little easier. But the shadow she was running from was longer and darker than she could have ever imagined. It was a shadow that had already begun to stretch across the country, reaching for her. The plot to end Sheila Bellush's life was not a crime of passion, but a cold and calculated conspiracy. It was a chain of malice that began with a man who could not accept losing control. Investigators believe the architect of the entire scheme was Allen Blackthorne. Fueled by a bitter desire for revenge after the custody battle and Sheila's move to Florida, he allegedly set the deadly plan in motion. He didn't want to get his own hands dirty. Instead, he reached out to a man with a checkered past from his golfing circle, a man named Daniel Rocha. Blackthorne allegedly offered Rocha money, not just to find Sheila, but to make sure she was silenced for good. Daniel Rocha, in turn, became the middleman, the next link in the deadly chain. He took the offer and began his search for someone willing to carry out the brutal act. His journey led him to his friend, a man named Sammy Gonzalez. Gonzalez was a small-time criminal, someone known in their circle for being tough. Rocha explained the job: find Sheila Bellush and hurt her. The motive was simple and sinister: to ensure Blackthorne would win custody of his daughters by making Sheila appear to be the victim of a random, violent crime that would prove Florida was too dangerous for the children. It was a twisted logic, born from obsession and cruelty. Gonzalez, however, decided he wouldn't be the one to travel to Florida. He needed his own accomplice, someone to do the dirty work. He recruited his cousin, a man named Jose Luis del Toro, Jr. Del Toro was a young man with a troubled history, and for a price, he was willing to become a killer. He was given Sheila's name and a general location. Armed with this information, he drove from Texas to Florida, a journey of over 1,000 miles with a singular, horrific purpose. He was the final piece of the puzzle, the weapon chosen to shatter a family's dream of peace. On that fateful November morning, Jose Luis del Toro found Sheila's home. He posed as a delivery man, a simple ruse to get her to open the door. When she did, he forced his way inside. The ensuing struggle was brutal. Sheila fought for her life, for her children who were just steps away in another room. But Del Toro was relentless. He shot her and then, in an act of extreme violence, slit her throat. He left her to die on her kitchen floor, changing into a new set of clothes he had brought with him and fleeing the scene. He left behind a scene of carnage and 4 terrified toddlers, his mission complete. The web of malice, spun from a place of hatred, had found its victim. When police arrived at the Bellush home, they were confronted with a scene of heartbreaking chaos. The immediate priority was the 4 toddlers, who were quickly taken into protective care. Investigators then began the painstaking process of combing through the evidence. The crime scene was brutal, but the killer had been careless. He had left behind clues, small but crucial mistakes that would ultimately lead detectives right to his door. The so-called perfect crime began to unravel almost as soon as it was committed. The trail, though faint at first, was there for them to follow. One of the first major breaks in the case came from a gas station receipt found in the Bellush home. It wasn't Sheila's. It was from a station along a major highway, and the timestamp on it helped investigators create a timeline for the killer's movements. They also found fingerprints and DNA that did not belong to anyone in the family. But perhaps the most critical piece of evidence was a description from a neighbor. Someone had seen a man in a camouflage jacket lurking around the neighborhood that morning, a man who didn't belong. This eyewitness account gave police a face, however vague, to put to the crime. As investigators dug deeper into Sheila's life, the name Allen Blackthorne came up again and again. The contentious divorce, the bitter custody battle, the allegations of harassment, it all pointed to a powerful motive. Detectives in Florida reached out to their counterparts in Texas, and soon, the focus shifted to Blackthorne's circle. They began to look at his associates, his friends, anyone who might have been enlisted to help him. The investigation was now a cross-country effort, a collaboration between law enforcement agencies determined to connect the dots between a millionaire in Texas and a murder in Florida. The trail of evidence led them methodically up the chain of command. The clues left by Jose Luis Del Toro eventually identified him as the prime suspect for the man at the scene. His fingerprints matched those found in the house. When questioned, the other men in the conspiracy began to turn on each other. Daniel Rocha, facing immense pressure from investigators, was the first to break. He confessed his role and implicated both Sammy Gonzalez and, most importantly, the man at the top, Allen Blackthorne. The web that Blackthorne had so carefully constructed to insulate himself was now collapsing, and the authorities were closing in. The path to justice was long and complex, unfolding across multiple trials and jurisdictions. The first to face a courtroom was Daniel Rocha, the middleman. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of a long prison sentence, he chose to cooperate with prosecutors. In exchange for his testimony against the other conspirators, he pleaded guilty to a lesser charge. His confession was the key that unlocked the entire case, providing a detailed roadmap of the murder-for-hire plot, from its inception with Allen Blackthorne to its brutal execution by Jose Luis Del Toro, Jr. Rocha was sentenced to life in prison, a steep price for his role. Next in the legal crosshairs was Sammy Gonzalez, the man who recruited his own cousin to be the hitman. His trial relied heavily on the testimony of his former friend Daniel Rocha. Prosecutors laid out how Gonzalez had facilitated the murder, acting as a crucial link between Rocha and Del Toro. The jury was convinced by the evidence and the chilling narrative of the conspiracy. Gonzalez was found guilty of first-degree murder. Like Rocha, he was sentenced to life behind bars, ensuring that 2 of the men, directly responsible for Sheila's death, would never again know freedom. The wheels of justice were turning, slowly but surely. The triggerman, Jose Luis Del Toro, Jr., proved to be the most elusive. After committing the murder, he fled, not just from Florida, but from the country. He escaped to Mexico, sparking an international manhunt that lasted for months. He was eventually captured and, after a lengthy extradition process, brought back to Florida to stand trial. His defense team argued he was not the killer, but the physical evidence was damning. His DNA was at the scene. His fingerprints were on the washing machine he had touched while changing his clothes. He was convicted of first-degree murder and burglary, and like the others, received a sentence of life in prison. The final and most anticipated trial was that of the alleged mastermind, Allen Blackthorne. Prosecuting a wealthy and powerful individual who had so carefully distanced himself from the crime was a monumental challenge. the case against him was largely circumstantial, built on the testimony of his co-conspirators. Prosecutors portrayed him as a manipulative and obsessive man who used his money and influence to order the death of his ex-wife. The defense painted him as a victim, a loving father framed by criminals looking for a deal. In the end, the jury believed the prosecution. Blackthorne was found guilty of interstate conspiracy to commit murder for hire, and was sentenced to 2 life terms in prison, without the possibility of parole. The architect of the crime had finally been held accountable. The convictions brought a measure of legal closure, but for Sheila's family, the pain was a life sentence. Her husband, Sheila Bellush, was left a widower, a single father to 6 grieving children. He had lost the love of his life and was now faced with the monumental task of raising their family alone, under the shadow of an immense tragedy. The home that was once filled with Sheila's laughter was now marked by her absence. Every corner, every room held a memory, a painful reminder of what they had all lost. Jamie's world, and the world of his children, had been permanently altered. The impact on the children was profound and heartbreaking. The quadruplets, just toddlers at the time of their mother's death, would grow up with no memory of her touch or her voice. Their understanding of their mother would be built from photographs and the stories told by their father and older siblings. For the 2 older daughters, Stevie and Daryl, the trauma was even more complex. They not only lost their mother in the most violent way imaginable, but they also had to grapple with the horrific knowledge that their own biological father was the man responsible for her murder. It was an almost unbearable burden for any child to carry. Stevie, the brave 13-year-old who discovered the horrific scene, was forced to grow up in an instant. The innocence of her childhood was stolen from her on that November afternoon. She carried the weight not only of her own grief, but of the responsibility she felt for her younger siblings. The family's journey through grief was long and fraught with challenges. They had to learn to navigate life without their matriarch, to celebrate birthdays and holidays with a void at the center of their family. The echoes of the crime resonated through every aspect of their lives, a constant reminder of the violence that had torn their world apart. Years later, the family continued to heal, a testament to their resilience and the deep love that bound them together. Jamie devoted his life to his children, ensuring they were surrounded by support and stability. He worked tirelessly to give them the happy, normal childhood that Sheila would have wanted for them. While the scars of the tragedy would never fully fade, the Bellush family's story became one of survival. They carried Sheila's memory forward, not as a victim of a terrible crime, but as a loving mother whose spirit endured in the lives of the children she adored. The murder of Sheila Bellush was more than just a single tragic event. It was a chilling wake-up call that cast a harsh spotlight on the pervasive dangers of domestic abuse and stalking. Sheila's story demonstrated in the most brutal terms that these issues do not simply end when a relationship does. For many victims, the post-separation period is the most dangerous time. Blackthorne's relentless harassment and his inability to relinquish control were classic indicators of a high-risk situation. The case forced a national conversation about the seriousness of stalking, showing that it is not a nuisance, but a potential precursor to extreme violence. This case served as a stark illustration of how the justice system can sometimes fail to protect victims. Sheila had sought help. She had gone through the legal process of divorce and custody battles. She had moved 1,000 miles away to create a safe distance. Yet none of these measures were enough to stop a determined and wealthy abuser. The crime highlighted the critical need for stronger legal protections for victims of stalking, more robust enforcement of restraining orders, and a greater understanding within law enforcement and the judiciary of the patterns of coercive control that often escalate to physical harm. The investigation itself became a model of interstate police cooperation. The seamless collaboration between detectives in Sarasota, Florida, and San Antonio, Texas, was crucial to solving the case. By sharing information and resources, they were able to connect the disparate pieces of the puzzle, linking a murder in a quiet suburb to a conspiracy hatched in a different state. The case underscored the importance of communication and teamwork in tackling complex criminal conspiracies that cross state lines, proving that no distance is too great when law enforcement agencies work together towards a common goal of justice. Perhaps one of the most significant lessons came from an unexpected source. A small, seemingly insignificant action by one person helped break the case wide open. During his cross-country trip, José Luis del Toro stopped at a gas station. He made a small purchase and, for some reason, left the receipt behind in the Bellush home. That tiny slip of paper with its date and timestamp became a critical piece of the timeline for investigators. It was a tangible link to the killer's journey, a breadcrumb on the trail that led from Florida back to Texas. It was a powerful reminder that in the fight for justice, no detail is too small, and carelessness can be a criminal's undoing. In the end, the chilling tale of Sheila Bellush is a story of contrasts. It is about the contrast between a mother's fierce love and an ex-husband's cold-blooded hatred. It is about the contrast between a family's search for a peaceful new beginning and the violent end that awaited them. Sheila's life was a testament to a mother's courage. She stood up to a powerful and manipulative man, not for herself, but to protect her children. She made the brave choice to leave, to start over, and to build a life free from fear. Her actions were not those of a victim, but of a protector. The resolution of this case hinged on the courage of others. It took courage for Daniel Rocha to break the code of silence and testify against the men who hired him. It took courage for investigators to pursue a wealthy and influential suspect, to follow the evidence no matter how high it led. And it took immense courage for a jury to look past the facade of success and see the monster lurking beneath. Justice was not a given. It was fought for and won through the determination and bravery of many individuals who refused to let Sheila's murder become just another unsolved crime. The story also serves as a potent lesson in vigilance. It teaches us that the signs of domestic abuse and stalking must be taken seriously. The threats, the harassment, the obsessive behavior, they are not isolated incidents but red flags signaling a clear and present danger. Sheila's experience underscores the importance of community awareness and the need for robust support systems for those trying to escape abusive situations. We must be vigilant for our friends, our neighbors, and our family members, and we must have the courage to see the danger and act before it's too late. Ultimately, Sheila Bellush's legacy is carried on by the children she loved so dearly. Her story is a heartbreaking reminder of the human cost of hatred and obsession, but it is also a story that highlights the power of small things, a forgotten receipt, a neighbor's observation, a conspirator's confession. These were the keys that unlocked the truth and delivered justice. Sheila's tragic end reminds us that while darkness and evil exist in the world, so too do courage, resilience, and an unyielding pursuit of the truth. And sometimes, that is enough to ensure that the light, however faint, will ultimately prevail.